The episode you are about to see will cover my top 10 favorite Sega AM2 games. In order to understand why I chose the games I did, it's probably best we take a look at the history of Yu Suzuki and AM2 itself. If we go back far enough in the AM2 catalog of games, we hit the so-called Studio 128, which is what the division was called that created such superscalar classics as Hang On, Space Harrier, OutRun, and Afterburner. This is really where my love of Sega began. These pseudo 3D games had captured my attention and imagination in a way no other arcade games at the time could. They were the baby steps of an era yet to come, and I was already looking forward to it. As was a regular occurrence with Sega, Studio 128 was restructured in the late 1980s and became Sega R&D 8, which is where Yu Suzuki would produce such classics as Turbo Outrun and Power Drift. Again, these games continued to be incredibly impressive and pushed sprite scaling further and further every single time. Sega R&D 8 was also a home console developer, producing the Mega Drive games Sword of Vermilion and Rent-A-Hero during its run. But Sega had felt it was slipping behind the competition. Arcade game makers were becoming more experimental with new technology, with chief rivals such as Namco investing heavily in polygon technology. Sega felt it needed to take action to stay relevant. Another round of restructuring in the early 1990s set Yu Suzuki's Sega R&D 8 on a new path, to create cutting-edge arcade games the likes the industry had never seen. With this new mission came a new name, Sega Amusement Machine Research and Development Department No. 2, or Sega AM2 for short. This began an era of unprecedented success for Sega. AM2 was responsible for both the creation of Sega's top-end arcade hardware and much of the software that would run on them. And that's where the games we are about to cover all originated. These 10 games came from AM2 proper, when it was actually called Sega AM2, and the legendary Yu Suzuki had a prominent role in every project. These are easily some of the best games ever made. The King of Route 66 is probably the biggest surprise on this list. It was originally released in 2002 for the Naomi 2 arcade hardware and was a sequel to 18-wheeler American Pro Trucker. It's got some of the DNA that made Crazy Taxi so much fun, now with more destruction, customization, and choice. It centers around trucking across the great American Midwest, delivering your load on time and crushing anything that gets in your way. At the time, this was a gorgeous game that really showed off what the Naomi 2 was capable of. It has the same great feeling that many of the other Sega AM2 racing games have, and the arcade cabinet had a freaking air horn you could abuse. It's got multiple camera views, multiplayer, and a ton of different paths you can explore to get to your destination quicker. A home version was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003, the only time we'd see a port of it, but it's nowhere near as pretty. If you enjoyed the likes of Crazy Taxi and Harley Davidson and LA Riders, this one should hold great appeal to you. As a big fan of gun games, it just doesn't get much better than Virtua Cop 2. It has everything you need to enjoy a good shooter. Branching paths, different weapons, cool boss battles, and the action just never lets up. I really enjoyed the first Virtua Cop, but the sequel here just blows it away. The graphics are a huge step up in quality and speed, and you get scenes with car chases and train rides that really add to the excitement. Grab a friend and it's the type of game you can damn near play forever. Sega had other gun games that were excellent as well, but Virtua Cop 2 definitely holds its own as a must-play title. It premiered on Sega's Model 2 arcade board, but later had a solid port to the Sega Saturn. Seeing Virtua Fighter 2 running in 1994 on a Model 2 arcade machine is the kind of stuff you just never forget. It was such a massive improvement over the original, it was hard to believe only a year separated them. It ran faster and now sported texture mapping and of course, those beautiful 3D backgrounds. I just stood at the arcade machine waiting for the attract screen to cycle back around to Shundi's bridge stage. To this day, I admire the hell out of it. The Sega Saturn got a nice port of it in 1995 and the PlayStation 2 got a Sega Ages version of it that was playable, but this wouldn't come home arcade perfect until the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 edition in 2012. It's still a great looking and playing fighter and happens to be quite inexpensive as well.
Ready, go!
The ambition of Shenmue was incredible at the time. It was to be an open world where you could do just about anything, and on the Sega Saturn no less. It needed to wait until the Dreamcast was released to become a reality, however. This predates games like Grand Theft Auto 3 by nearly 2 years, a reminder of just how far ahead Yu Suzuki's epic really was. It starts out with a story that just begs to be loved. After helplessly watching your father killed, you set out on a quest for revenge. You get to meet a bunch of people along the way, learn a few life lessons, and kick a few asses. I always had a Kill Bill fantasy to the end of this one. Ryo, finally reaching his potential, kills Lan Di in cinematic fashion. I had thought Part 3 would finally bring me this conclusion, yet I still remain unsatisfied over 20 years later.
Father! Why you...
Virtua Racing is high on this list because of the time and place it was released. In 1992, the Sega Model 1 was pure magic. Seeing this running was nothing short of a revelation to my young eyes. Polygons were here to stay and would soon run this industry top to bottom. While companies like Namco and Atari had polygon games before it, it was sitting in this cabinet that all that became clear for the very first time. It played so well and was such an advancement over the other racing games at the time, you just couldn't help but to be in total awe of its greatness. It's one of the first games I ever played in widescreen, and even though it was hard as all get out, I still dumped countless credits into it. Home versions have varied in quality over the years, but the Sega Ages Switch version is the one you want today. It's about as pretty as a flat shaded game can get. Choosing a top 5 was no simple thing, but I really do feel that Fighter's Megamix belongs here. It's one of the very few times AM2 let their creative flag fly on a console game. They weren't bound by the limitations of copying an arcade port, and instead just loaded this one up with everything they thought would simply be fun. And this game excels at that. It drops the serious nature of the Virtua Fighter games, brings in some of the gameplay from Fighting Vipers, and introduces a whole cast of characters from other Sega IPs like Virtua Cop, Sonic, and Daytona USA. It was really one of the few times Sega just cut loose and did something for the sheer joy of it, and the end product was spectacular.
Fight! Ready, go!
Scud Race, also known as Sega Super GT, was one of the very first racing games I saw on the Model 3 arcade platform. Man, was it something to behold. There had been some great looking Model 2 games, don't get me wrong, but Scud Race shatters the next generation barrier with visuals from the gods. AM2 always managed to amaze with each new piece of hardware, and this one was one of the best I had ever seen. It plays a tad like the Daytona games, but really expands on the cars and environments you race in. Many people consider it the better game, and with the quality being this high, it's really hard to argue. There has never been a home version of it for anything. I'm gonna cheat a little bit on this one, but I had a really hard time deciding which Daytona should be in at number 3. Instead of taking up 2 spots in the top 5, we'll leave both Daytona USA and Daytona USA 2 as a tie. Both these games play about as nice as you could want, relying heavily on power sliding and speed over braking and slowing down. It makes for an exciting time in both. The first Daytona USA appeared in 1994 on the Model 2, while its sequel appeared in 1998 on the Model 3. There is a pretty large difference in graphical quality between the two, but the gameplay is definitely on equal footing. I do concede the music in the first is quite a bit more impressive, but I don't hate what's in the second. These two games had a profound effect on my arcade days, providing me and my friends untold amounts of fun as we traveled all over our state looking for the best coin-ops to enjoy. Daytona USA came home in various ways to the Saturn and Dreamcast, but wouldn't be arcade perfect until the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions in 2011. Unfortunately, Daytona 2 has never come home in any form. As good as the previous Virtua Fighters had been, it was part 4 in 2001 that really took the series to the next level. The arcade version was on the Naomi 2 and was just gorgeous in every conceivable way. It also took the elements of the previous games and expanded on them heavily. The evade button from Virtua Fighter 3 was removed in favor of baking in a counter system that effectively does the same thing. The uneven stages of Part 3 have also been replaced by more traditional rings, but they do still have walls that can be used during combat. You get a ton of customization options for the fighters now and can really make them your own. There is a cool mode where you can travel to virtual arcades and take on top fighters there, some of them patterned after real-life champions at the time. Virtua Fighter 4 would see multiple upgrades over the next few years, one called Evolution and the other called Final Tuned. They each added additional customizations and gameplay tweaks. We lost the sumo Taka Arashi from Virtua Fighter 3 but gained a few in his absence. A PS2 port was released of Virtua Fighter 4 and Evolution, but they were cut back visually from the arcade. To date, an arcade-perfect port of this has never been released. You could likely change out Virtua Fighter 5 with this because it was excellent as well. You really can't go wrong with either one. They have more gameplay and content than most other fighters of the era combined.
2, ready, go! KO!
My number one choice, I feel, is the absolute best arcade game I've ever played. It's perfect. I can't genuinely find a single flaw in it. I know, hyperbole to some of you, but not to me. When it comes to arcade-style racing, this sits atop the throne of pure awesome. It's all about speed and keeping it up, and rarely will you need to use that brake pedal for anything of substance. You'll zoom through landmarks you know well, and face traffic and weather conditions intent on slowing you down. The arcade system it ran on was known as the Chihiro, which was based on the original Xbox. The visuals were spectacular for the time. I mean, there wasn't a better looking racing game around. Great draw distance, killer textures, and it all ran as smooth as you could have hoped. The original OutRun had been an epic game worthy of a sequel that matched its greatness. It got that and then some in OutRun 2. It received an update called OutRun 2 SP soon after, which most of the home versions are based on. You can find these on the original Xbox, PlayStation 2, PSP, PC, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. Sega AM2 made a lot of games in its time. From the sprite-scaling behemoth Radmobile to the Virtua Striker games, there are loads of great software out there for you to enjoy. As the years would go on, AM2 would change quite a bit. Yu Suzuki's role would get smaller and smaller until he tried to run a new division called Digital Rex in 2003, but that fell apart with Sega's merger into Sammy. He would ultimately leave the company entirely in 2009. AM2 would continue through major restructuring afterwards, with projects spread all around, including mobile games. While their place in the industry diminished heavily with the slowing of arcade development, their legacy is simply undeniable. During the prolific rise of polygon gaming, there were few developers that could match their sheer brilliance when it came to the transition. Their arcade games were often cutting edge graphically and played just as well. Model 2 emulation is strong enough now to revisit many of these titles. If you've never played the likes of Desert Tank or Fighting Vipers, be sure to do so. Just because I didn't include it on my list here doesn't mean I didn't love it, but choosing just 10 AM2 games is no easy thing. There was a creative spark there that really showed the industry how to make these games, and the success of many of the developers that followed can be directly attributed to them. It's easy to wallow in the failures of Sega and talk about what went wrong and why, but when you bring up Sega AM2, you speak with a pride and reverence that makes it clear there was a part of Sega that guided and led this industry for years, and nothing anyone says will ever take that away. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.